Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program via the Community Radio Network. This program is podcast, so if something happens, the earth moves for you, don't despair. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast on 3cr.org.au. And if you wonder what anarchy is all about, very simple concept, anarchos without rulers. So what's the main thrust of an anarchist society? The main thrust of an anarchist society is to create a society without rulers. What gives rulers power? Inequalities in power and wealth. So what is the anarchist struggle? The anarchist struggle is to create a society without with no inequalities as far as power and wealth is concerned. How do you do that? Via direct democratic means. The people involved in the decision make that decision, then elect or appoint delegates to coordinate those decisions at a local, national and even international level, and where wealth is held in common and used for the common good. It's an old-fashioned concept, nothing new about anarchism. So if you're involved in struggles to improve people's lives and the lives of the community you live in, well, then you may be an anarchist. Well, you are an anarchist without knowing it, because you're about breaking down hierarchy. So it's very simple. You don't need a PhD in politics to understand what it's all about. It's a very simple concept. It's about taking the views of most everybody into account and creating structures which allow those views to be implemented, and it's about holding wealth in common. Okay, let's move on. Look, I like to start off with West Papua. Now, I know a lot of people get tied up in this issue and that issue and this issue, but I'm just amazed at how little interest there is in West Papua, which is part of Indonesia, incorporated Indonesia, I think it's in 1960 or 61 or 62. And see, the West Papuan struggle hasn't gone away, and their struggle for independence has stretched over 60 years. And currently, the Indonesian Parliament, before it rose for the election, which will be held next weekend, declared war on the West Papuan resistance movement, which still exists in the forests and jungles and mountains of West Papua. And over the last few weeks, over 25,000 refugees have poured out of those sites as the war effort, the effort to eradicate the armed wing of the West Papua independence movement gathers momentum. And you've got to remember that the West Papuan integration into Indonesia was to a large degree acquiesced to by Australia in the 1960s, the Menzies government. And the United States of America has a huge investment in the Freeport mine, which is basically a mountain of gold, which has created billions of dollars of profits, which most of them have been exported back overseas. See, the West Papuans today are basically strangers in their own land, a little bit like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Their numbers have decreased to about 50% of the population because the huge transmigration program that's brought other Indonesians into West Papua to begin agriculture, non-subsistence agricultural practices. But the key is this struggle is ongoing. It is 75 kilometres. West Papua is 75 kilometres from the Australian coastline. Over 500,000 people have died directly or indirectly as a result of Indonesian occupation in the last 60 years. The struggle does continue. And there are a number of West Papuan refugees and asylum seekers in this country who have not forgotten where they come from. They have continued to be involved in the independence struggle in this country. And 5 years ago, my late wife, Ellen Jose, and myself, we were in discussions with the refugees here, the West Papuan refugees in Melbourne. We were able to set up a rent collective to pay the rent for an office in Docklands in Collins Street in Melbourne to act as a major organising centre for the West Papuan independence struggle, not just here in Australia but around the world, because there are very few West Papuan independence offices around the world. There's 3, 2 attached to universities, and this one here is a freestanding. And the West Papuan office exists as a direct result of Australians, people like you and me, giving money on a weekly or monthly basis or a yearly basis to pay the rent. Our job is not to tell the West Papuans how to conduct their independence struggle. Our job is to provide a mechanism via which they can conduct an independence struggle. So instead of spending 90% of their time trying to raise money to have a roof over their heads to conduct that struggle, they can spend 95% of their time conducting that struggle. And the inception of that office 4.5 years ago has accelerated the international demands for West Papuan independence to such a degree that we are now looking at placing the question of decolonisation back on the United Nations Decolonisation Committee. And the West Papuans have been actively working to make this a reality. And that office has been crucial to bringing their plight to the world's attention. Now, it's easy to join the Rent Collective. We are looking for new members. We are always looking for new members. People die. People move on. People's financial situation changes and they leave the Rent Collective. Now, you can donate anonymously. You can put your name to your donation. But if you do want to join the West Papuan Rent Collective, and many of the Rent Collective members gathered at the office on last Sunday, because we have 3 gatherings a year at the West Papuan office to find out the progress of the West Papuan independence struggle. If you want to join the Rent Collective, and I encourage you to join, it's $1 a day, $30 a month, $365 for a year, or $366 in a leap year. It's the best investment you'll ever make. It's not tax deductible. It is not tax deductible. So if you're looking for a tax deduction, move on. Many of the Rent Collective members are on limited incomes, but they are willing to make that sacrifice to ensure the West Papua independence movement continues to exist and, more importantly, expand. So this is one of the initiatives which has been carried out by the Anarchist Media Institute over the years. It's one of our most important initiatives because what it has been able to do is create that physical space which allows people to organise in order to conduct that struggle. So if you wish to be a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective, or you want to know how to be a member, and I said it can be done anonymously, you can leave a contact number on 04 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. You can write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052, or you can leave a message on info@anarchistage@yahoo.com. anarchistage@yahoo.com. I'd like to speak about a petition, which is a virtual petition as well as a physical petition, which has been put in place in the last few days by the West Papuan office, and I'll speak about that on the YouTube presentation, next week's YouTube presentation. And if you want to have a look at these YouTube presentations, just go public interest before corporate interests, public interest before corporate interests, and I'll be speaking about that there, and also the next radio program I'll be speaking more about this petition. You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. I also want to speak about democracy today. It's a much maligned, overused, ill-defined word. And with an election around the corner, which will be called in the next few days, I think we need to understand what democracy is. But it's not, as people think, the rule of the majority over the minority. If we had that, well, the majority may want to execute every blue-eyed 2-year-old in the land. Democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people. Simple concept. Rule of the people, that's the people make the decisions, for the people, by the people. It's not about rule of the people by the state, rule of the people by the corporate sector, rule of the people by vested interests. It's about rule of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, in this country, we have a very rudimentary form of democracy, which is called parliamentary democracy or representative democracy. Every 3 years at the federal level and 4 years at the state level in most states in this country, you are forced by legislation, as voting is compulsory, or actually voting isn't compulsory. What is compulsory is turning up and have your name crossed off. Every 3 years or 4 years, you go through the charade, 2 minutes of illusory power, where you give somebody power to make decisions for you over the next 3 years. That's representative democracy. You abrogate your responsibilities as a citizen, your day-to-day responsibilities as citizens. You give them to a representative and you say, here's my signed blank cheque. I trust you. I believe what you've told me regarding your agenda for the next 3 years, and I give you my power to make decisions for me. So basically, parliamentary democracy or representative democracy is about giving somebody a signed blank cheque to make decisions for you. If I was standing in the middle of Collins Street and giving out signed blank cheques, I'm sure it wouldn't take long before I was taken away and charged with fraud or put away in a secure psychiatric institution. But parliamentary democracy, similar concept. Now, the problem with parliamentary democracy in Australia is there is no mechanisms via which the individual elector can ensure that the representative they have elected will do all in their power to honour their promise. It's an act of faith. Parliamentary democracy or representative democracy is an act of faith. You have faith in that individual like you have your faith in your gods or your God. It's an act of faith. So, how could you actually improve representative democracy? I'm not a supporter of representative democracy, and I'll explain why in a few minutes, but how could you improve it? You can improve it by a number of mechanisms. You can improve it by having in legislation the power of recall, which means that in between elections, if a representative is basically not honouring the promises or attempting to honour the promises they made, then the electors have the ability to recall that representative and call fresh elections till the next general election. So that's the power of recall. And certain representative democracies do have the power of recall. Then the other way via which the people can be directly involved in the decision-making process is the concept of citizens-initiated referendums, where the citizens make the decision for a referendum, and that decision is then binding on the government. And we have this type of system in play, in representative democratic system in Switzerland, and it seems to work quite well. Where if a number of, I think it's about 5-10% of the electorate, want a particular issue to go to the elector, there is a debate, there is a campaign, and that issue has to be put to the electors, and they say yay or nay on that particular issue. Now, obviously, there are mechanisms by which this can be manipulated, but if you have legislation in place which restricts the amount of resources or ensures that the resources which are given to either side of the argument are equal, then you can overcome the problem of a small group of individuals dominating that debate. So you've got ways you can actually assist representative democracy and make it more democratic by having legislation which gives electors the power to recall non-performing politicians in between elections and fresh election to be held in that electorate, and the power for citizens to actually make legislation by having citizens-initiated referendums. Now then there's another form of democracy which is called representative democracy, which is called direct democracy, which is based on the concept of delegation. And we saw direct democracy in action in Australia in 1854 during the Eureka Rebellion, where the Ballarat Reform League, which is the organisation behind the Eureka Rebellion, held mass meetings. This is mass meetings without PAs, without, electronic enhancement of a voice. And at these mass meetings, decisions were made and delegates were appointed by the mass meeting. We're talking about 15,000, 20,000 people at these mass meetings. And delegates were elected to actually speak on behalf of that mass meeting. And those delegates needed to report back to the mass meeting to have any decisions ratified. So that's what direct democracy is about. You don't actually go into a ballot to elect somebody to make decisions for you. What you do in a direct democratic society is that you make the decision with the people around you, and then you elect or appoint delegates with specific instructions or specific mandates to carry out those decisions and to coordinate those decisions at a local, regional, national and even international level. So it's democracy on steroids. Direct democracy can only succeed if we have an active population. And the decision-making process is left to 2 or 3%, well then what you create is a new bureaucracy, a new leadership, a new ruling class. So in a direct democratic society, you have the power to be involved in decisions which directly or indirectly affect you. Now, obviously, in any democratic society, or it's a representative democracy, or a direct democratic society, what you have is a constitution or principles of association, which ensures that the majority cannot take away the fundamental rights of a minority. That's what your principles associations are for. Now, the dilemma over the next few weeks with this election campaign is, one, you'll be promised the world, and in many cases those potential representatives have no intention of honouring any of those promises. Two, you'll be subjected to campaigns which are basically based on lies. I'll give you an example. Now, the Australian Labor Party, the alternative Liberal Party to some people, has made a pledge that they would like 50% of all new cars to be electric that are purchased by, I think it's 2030. Now, the Liberal National Party, seeing an opportunity, has jumped up and down and said that this will ensure that the Labor Party will steal your weekend. It will steal your weekend. That's right. Because somehow, having an increased electric car component in the number of cars that exist in Australia to help decrease greenhouse emissions, somehow this will destroy the leisure activities of most Australians. So you'll be part of this barrage over the next few weeks. There'll be this constant barrage of lies and counter-lies, promises and counter-promises. And at the end of the day, as it's a representative democracy, you can't really do much about it. Just hope that the person you selected actually gets elected. Then we see the problem in a representative democracy, as we've seen currently, with people paying tens of thousands of dollars to get meetings with ministers. Could you imagine that? Tens of thousands of dollars to have an interview, have a little lunch with Mr. Dutton or Mr. Pine or somebody else. People actually paying money to middlemen and women to organise lunches with ministers of the Crown in order to put their case directly to them, and hopefully, using their monetary influence, they'll be able to actually influence government policy. And that's the problem in a representative democracy. Because the focus of power moves from the people, democracy, rule of the people, by the people, for the people. It moves from the people to that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, the 1%ers. So what we see in this country and what we see on a daily basis, irrespective of what the issue is, we see governments who are hostages to people who have access, who have accumulated wealth. And we see legislation come into play which improves their bottom line, which improves their profitability, which concentrates power in the hands of that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. And that's what we see. We see that our political representatives have three masters. They have you, the elector who elects them, who'll be electing our federal representatives at the Senate level and the House of Representatives level in the next month or so. Then they have the political party, which determines pre-selection of that representative. And then on top of that, you got that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and all their mates in the investment class, the 8% of Australians who have enough disposable income to actually be part of that investment class and take advantage of all those investment options you can legally utilise in this country to minimise your taxes to nothing while growing your wealth. So we've got this, three-way relationship. We've got the elected representative at the middle, we've got the people on one side, We've got the 1%ers on one side, on the other side, and you've got the political parties on the other side. So who do you think the political representative is going to... Who do you think is it their immediate masters? Well, their immediate masters are the political party. And that political party owes its allegiance to a significant degree to the people who who donate to that political party. So the political party is ultimately responsible not to the electorate, not to the people who have elected them, but to that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. This is the weakness of having a representative democracy where we have all these middle people who are getting their cut, and you're left with the option of voting somebody else into power in 3 years' time. Again, based on faith. It's a little bit like self-regulation. You allow corporations to self-regulate, and obviously they will do what is needed to protect their interests. And it's the same for political representatives. They basically are not accountable to the electorate in any meaningful way. And today we have the ridiculous situation in 2019 in Australia on the verge of a parliamentary election where our political representatives, the people we will choose, those people who vote will choose for the next 3 years, are more frightened of their political party they belong to and the 1%ers than they are of the people who put them in power, the elector. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. That's 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. If you want to learn more about anarchism, go to anarchistmedia.org. Want to join public interest before corporate interest? Obviously, we will not be there at this election. We don't have the members to be a registered political party. Our numbers still hover around 400. If you want to join, no point complaining. Just have a look at the Constitution. You like what you see, download the application form, join up virtually. Or, if you've got no access to the virtual world or no interest in the virtual world, you can always obtain an application form by ringing me on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489, or writing to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. That's Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. We're quite happy to have members both on and off the electoral roll. We can only use members on the electoral roll. We need about 550 members on the electoral roll to be able to register public interest before corporate interest as a federal political party. Let's move on. Sudan. You know, I think most of you wouldn't have much idea of where Sudan is. Or you may. Just south of Egypt. Right near the, not far, on the Red Sea. A pivotal nation state in terms of having access to the Middle East. Pivotal. And over the last 30 years, Sudan has been ruled by a military dictatorship which initially introduced Sharia laws and was a Muslim fundamentalist state and continues to be a Muslim fundamentalist state. But the thing about Sudan is it's not this unified cultural entity. You've got the Darfur region, which was involved in an open revolt for many, many years, where tens of thousands of people died, hundreds of thousands were displaced. That's in the west. And then in the east, you've got people who are not Arabic speaking. In the centre, you've got the centred on Khartoum, which is a city of over 10 million people. You have an Arabic-speaking population. And in the south, we saw that 50-year war where the Sudanese government was involved in some of the most worst atrocities of the 20th and the 21st century. And the dictator al-Bashir was initially indicted for crimes against humanity, but somehow seems to have slipped out of that indictment. Now, with the loss of South Sudan, which is oil-rich, and with the problem of the Sudanese military and the bureaucracy, mainly the military bureaucracy, using the Sudanese people as a cash cow, what we saw by the end of 2018 was a country on the brink of economic collapse. Now, this was a country which was providing 3 tertiary education for its young people, as well as primary and secondary education and 3 healthcare, and subsidised basic necessities like oil, bread. So in December, the government, in its wisdom, decided to partially remove many of these subsidies because there was nothing left. Everything had been privatised during the past 10 years as Sudan moved from the orbit of the Soviet Union into the orbit of the United States of America. So sporadic street protests started to occur in December. And these protests have continued unabated for the last 3.5 months. And currently, the military headquarters in Khartoum have been surrounded by protesters who are demanding the end of the old regime and the beginning of a new type of democratic government. In the last 24 hours, over 20 people have been killed by security forces. Because you've got to remember, you've got the Sudanese army and then you've got all these militias which are directly responsible to the al-Bashir ruling elite. And although the military has continued to support al-Bashir, there are cracks now beginning to appear in the military. So the dreaded Janjaweed, which were the shock troops which were used in South Sudan during their independence struggle, are now based in Khartoum. And they still owe their allegiances to the al-Bashir military dictatorship. And what we are seeing over the last few days is these paramilitary forces being used in Sudan to try to keep this 30-year dictatorship, which is based on Sharia law, in place. So, but emboldened by what's happened in Algeria, where a 30-year dictator was forced to resign in the last week, the people of Sudan are coming out in their droves into the streets, trying to regain some power and some control over their society. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. The Coalition Corps. Will the Coalition Corps do what John Howard did? John Howard, at one stage, described his chances of being Prime Minister as he had the same chance as Lazarus with a triple bypass. Now, those of you who aren't used to Christian analogies, Lazarus was the man who was risen from the dead by Jesus Christ. Now, people are talking about the Coalition Corps. Now, Mr. Morrison the leader of one of the most inept and what looks like corrupt governments we've had in this country for decades, believes that he can shock the Frankenstein back into the coalition corpse. He believes he can make the coalition corpse into the ghost who walks. My apologies to Phantom comic fans. And this campaign, which we will see unleashed on the Australian people, is a campaign which will be based on fear. With the failure of their budget, their goldfish budget, to give them the dead cat bounce in the opinion polls they expected, with the failure of that budget, the only cattle prod they have left to goad the electorate into a coalition victory is fear. The fear of the country being swamped, not by the yellow peril this time, but by refugees. And they have flogged that horse to an inch of its life, using the hostages that have been at Nauru and Manus Island as their whipping boys and girls. They have flogged that issue to an inch of its life because they know they create the idea that we are about to be invaded by refugees and asylum seekers, that somehow the Australian people will breathe life back into the coalition corpse. Then you have fear of the unions. As I speak, there are tens of thousands of unionists marching through the streets of Melbourne, demanding changes to the industrial relations laws, demanding wage increases, demanding the abolition of the Australian Building and Construction Commission, an organisation which is as draconian, as powerful as any secret organisation, secret government bureaucracy, demanding the return of overtime payments, demanding the ability of workers to take action, industrial action, without being bankrupted or imprisoned to improve their lot in life, demanding wage rises. So we will have the union card which will be waved in the air, that the trade unions are behind the Labor Party, that if the Labor Party is elected, this country will grind to a halt because of industrial and workplace action. So that's that fear of the unions. So we've got fear of the asylum seeker, fear of the unions. Then we have fear of doing anything about climate change. Anything. Because what it'll mean is increased electricity prices. So we see this ridiculous situation where on the eve of an election being called, the federal minister gives the final federal tick to the Adani coal mine, a coal mine that hasn't even got the finances to get started. Not giving us any insight into how that decision was made. We're told that the CSIRO, which was initially against the Adani mines plans, now supports them. But we're not given any insight into the processes which occurred. So we've got fear about doing something about climate change, which leads us to the ludicrous situation where the coalition corpse thinks it can be shocked back into existence if people believe that action on climate change will somehow deny them their weekends. You know who denies you your weekends today? It's not action on climate change and your ability to get in a car and go somewhere. It's all these laws that have been put into place which have deregulated the labour market, which means we have 24/7 business functioning, which means that people are no longer free to take time off during the weekends and spend it with their families and friends because of the changes to the system, which has basically ensured that full-time jobs no longer exist in this country. It's all about short-term contracts. So we've got fear about taking action on climate change, fear about asylum seekers. We would have had fear about Muslims if it wasn't for the atrocities and slaughter which occurred in Christchurch a few weeks ago, although I have noticed that we seem to have forgotten, and this type of idea has come back into play. Then we have fear of people on social security system, fear of the 30% of Australians who live close to or below the poverty line because of an inadequate social security system, fear that somehow these are the people that are creating the conditions which are bankrupting society. So you've got this campaign which is structured to marginalise and criminalise people on social security benefits for the very act of being on a social security benefit, somehow thinking they're all bludgers and that somehow they are sucking the country dry. Then you've got fear of Aboriginal land rights and sea rights and a fear of actually entering negotiations for a significant treaty. So fear is the electricity that Mr. Morrison hopes will re-energise the Frankenstein coalition. And it is a Frankenstein coalition, irrespective of the Labor Party's shortcomings, and it has many, many shortcomings. In comparison to the Morrison-led Liberal Party and the National Party, it's a god. In comparison. So the coalition, this is what the election campaign will be about re-energising the coalition corpse by using fear to get something which is in rigor mortis to sit up and grin and gain power. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. You have to laugh. Look, I need $10,000 because I want to have a meeting with Mr. Dutton. Well, I actually need about $50,000. I've got to grease the hand of the man who can get me the interview. And then there may be a little bit more greasing as I go along. And it's normal business, we're told by Mr. Morrison. Normal way the government conducts business. Senator Cormann forgets to pay for a few tickets. Some ex-Liberal politician gets, tens of thousands of dollars to organise a meeting with Mr. Dutton. And somehow things happen. Quite extraordinary. Health. So what will be the dominant issues in this campaign? Well, if the coalition, it'll be about fear. The Labor Party thinks they may have a little bit of success pushing a minimist reform agenda, like getting rid of negative gearing for new investors in the marketplace. Not old investors. There'll be a grandfather clause which ensures they can continue to enjoy their negative gearing gains. Then there's the franking tax credits. That was a very funny debate which kind of seems to have disappeared, wasn't it? When the federal government passed legislation over a year ago with the support of the crossbenchers on the Senate, a right-wing, rabid group of corpses, which ensured that the 745,000 Australians who receive social security benefits would no longer receive the same benefits or decreased benefits or no benefits by changing the goalposts as far as application of these changes was concerned. Minimal response in the government gelded ABC and the corporate-owned media. Minimal response. We have the Labor Party talking about removing franking credits, and let's not forget you need $2 million of shares in your superannuation fund to receive $8,000 in franking credits, and it may affect maybe 25,000 people to a significant degree and another 200,000 in a minor degree. All hell has broken loose. All hell has broken loose. Extraordinary. Just extraordinary. So get ready for it. Get ready for the onslaught over the next 4 weeks. Get ready for the disgusting ads. And think to yourself, where did the money come from? Who's bankrolling this campaign? Will my representative honour his or her word? Can I trust them? What are the political parties doing? What are the fear mongers on the fringes doing? Because the extraordinary thing is that time and time and time again, we never see any real action occurring in this country. Now, I'm sick of issue-orientated campaigns which somehow get the oxygen needed to ensure that they, creak along. How about the campaign by Public Housing Everybody's Business? 2.5 years of campaigning. 10 days on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House. Weekly rallies. The rally on the 10th, the 17th and the 24th will be on Wednesday at 1 p.m. for the month of April. Where's the traction? Housing. Are you going to hear about housing affordability during the federal election? No. No. You're going to hear about public housing? No. It doesn't fit their current ideological agenda. It doesn't fit the deregulation, corporatisation, privatisation, globalisation agenda of the major political parties. I mean, things here, in some regards, are just as bad as Sudan. Everything's been privatised. The ports have been privatised. Could you imagine that? The ports have been privatised. The airports have been privatised. The National Bank, the Commonwealth Bank, was privatised. Telecommunications has been privatised. Most of the armed forces outside the fighting divisions have been privatised. The NDIS is privatised. They're talking about privatising the HEX debt. Centrelink is being privatised. Public health facilities are being privatised. For example, if you go to a major public hospital, cleaning staff will be employed by a private agency which has been contracted out. They're not employed by the state government. Kitchen staff, if a kitchen exists, same deal. Radiological services, pathological services. And we've now reached the stage where there's no more family silver to sell. Think about it. And they're asking you to give them a tick of approval at the next federal election. What I find extraordinary is we're told that this country's fortunes are based on mineral exports, whether it's coal, whether it's iron ore, whether it's gold, whether it's diamonds, whether it's rare earth, whether it's gases. The list goes on and on. Now, these resources theoretically belong to the Crown. Obviously, they were stolen from the indigenous population, but now they theoretically belong to the Crown, because when you own a piece of land, you own about 1 foot. Anything under that piece of land belongs to the Crown. Now, we have allowed private corporations to dominate that marketplace and make billions of dollars of profit, which we could have made as a nation if these industries were actually owned and run by the state. But they're not. They're in the hands of private corporations, and they continue to be in the hands of private corporations, which dictate eventual parliamentary legislation. You've been listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. If you want to get involved in the public housing struggle, which has been pushed along by public interest before corporate interests, go to the Facebook page, Public Housing, Everybody's Business. If you want to be involved in the West Papuan Rent Collective, give us a call on 0439 395 489. Send an email to anarchistage@yahoo.com or write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. You want to be involved in public interest before corporate interests? You want to be a member? Want to see what it's all about? Go to the website, Public Interest Before Corporate Interests, PIBCI, PIBCI.net, PIBCI, PIBCI.net. You can actually go to my personal Facebook page, Toscano for the Public, Toscano for the Public. And if you want to see what I look like, you can always go to the YouTube channel, Public Interest Before Corporate Interests, a separate program every week, Public Interests Before Corporate Interests. Now, at The Anarchist World This Week is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. The program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Another program I'm involved in is Radical Australia, an interview program. You want to be interviewed on Radical Australia? Give me a call, 0439 395 489. 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Radical Australia, streaming live on 3cr.org.au. And if you want to get involved in discussions, you can always ring us on Talkback with Attitude, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on 3CR 94190155. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm responsible for any electoral comment I have made today, and we'll be making that announcement the next 5 to 6 weeks. As I said before, if you're a PIBCI member, hopefully in the next 4 to 6 weeks you'll get your voting cards on a final vote on 8 policy initiatives and a lot of other bits and pieces in the mail. We still need about $300 in stamps to complete the mail out, because it will include a stamped self-addressed envelope. So send $1 stamps to Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. And don't forget that if you're a regular listener to this program, that we will have a special radiophone program in June. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World This Week via the Community Radio Network on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast, so if something nasty happened while I was broadcasting, like your bladder let you down, well, don't despair. The program is podcast, 3cr.org.au. Listen to The Anarchist World This Week, next week. And don't forget, public housing, everybody's business. Affordable housing is everybody's business. It should be the issue of the federal election. Unfortunately, it won't be, because we'll be looking at really esoteric things like the Labor Party stealing your weekend. That's right, stealing your weekend. The Christmas Grinches have arrived early. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. Listen in via the Community Radio Network next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.